Welcome to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. This podcast is for you if you lead people, teams, or the organisation. You might be a leader or a manager yourself, or you might be part of the support team to help those people to be really successful. I'm Anwen Botwa. I'm the Leadership Success Coach and founder of Purple Sky Consulting, and I'm going to be the host for this podcast. My mission is to help as many leaders as possible to really love what they do. I want to help you to feel more confident, more capable, more effective, so that you can build and grow happy, healthy, more successful teams. This podcast is going to be all about helping you to love leading. We are going to be exploring topics and themes about leading in a way that will help you in your day-to-day, but also support your continuous development. The episodes are going to be conversations, and I'm going to be bringing you some expert guests. We're going to explore the topics that they're an expert in, and we're going to look at it in a helpful, insightful, but practical way. You'll be able to access this podcast on audio through your favourite podcast provider, but if you prefer, you'll be able to find us on YouTube to watch along there too. Welcome to this episode of Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders. Today, we're going to be focusing about well-being, your well-being, because that's really important. When we're not in a great place as leaders, it has a huge impact on our ability to be there and to support the well-being of our people, our teams. So taking some time to really focus on ourselves first will really pay off. A bit like when you go on an aeroplane and they share about the oxygen masks and that you need to put that on first before helping others. Well-being as a leader is absolutely about that too. So we're going to be exploring that topic today with our guest, Gemma Carter-Morris from Next Steps Consulting. This is a huge area of focus for Gemma and her work and her business's work. I'm really excited that she's joining us for the podcast today, because that episode should be a positive one, should be about helping you to be your very best, helping you to be in a great place as you lead. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. So, hi Gemma, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. If you'd like to just do a little bit of an intro for us, that would be really lovely.
Oh, fab. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. So I suppose it all started for me. I'm a bit of a sports fanatic, and my first ever job actually was a tennis coach. And I spent 15 years working in the sports industry, was lucky enough to work for the London 2012 Olympics, which was an incredible experience. And then the majority of my career was in kind of higher education. And I suppose since leaving the world of sport 4.5 years ago, I now focus on kind of helping people reach their potential and helping people be the best that they can be. And the roles I've had previously, I've always loved developing people, kind of seeing people go onto new roles. And yeah, that's something that I'm lucky enough to do now on a daily basis, which I'm very thankful for. And this is mainly kind of through coaching, really. So I do a lot of wellbeing coaching with individuals and with groups. And I also do a lot of career coaching as well, which is something that I love. And so helping people that have been made redundant, helping them think about what their kind of next steps are, and particularly focusing on the wellbeing for those individuals. You know, it's a very difficult time. And then I also do lots of work with organisations kind of on their strategic approach to wellbeing and how they can really put employee wellbeing at the forefront of everything that they do and kind of really build that sustainable culture of wellbeing.
Amazing. That's a fantastic intro, and I've been lucky enough to get to know you over the last year or so, and we've started working together on some other things as well, and you did a fantastic session in the Boost Connect Leadership Development Programme, which was fantastic and went down an absolute storm. And it just goes to show really kind of you can take all those inspirations from those different parts of our lives, but actually creating a space for a focus, a conversation about well-being is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, luckily it's something that's being talked about a lot more, and those kind of stigmas around looking after ourselves are being broken down. But yeah, it's kind of fundamental really to look after ourselves, so that we can kind of look after our other people and kind of be at our very best, which is, you know, what I'm a huge advocate of.
Wonderful. And as you know, my big driver for well-being in my life is travel and seeing the world and experiencing the world. So I'm going to be entirely nosy and ask you for any top tips, or at least where has been your favourite travel destination?
Oh, yeah. So sadly, I've not done as much travelling as you two have done, or the travelling you've done. But I was lucky enough to spend the summer working for a turtle conservation project in Costa Rica, actually. So I did a biology degree specialising in ecology and conservation, and that's kind of another real passion of mine. So whenever I go on a holiday, I like to try and see kind of animals in their natural environment and their natural habitat. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of poaching of turtle eggs in Costa Rica, and so I worked for a project that was trying to kind of reduce the number of poaching and ensuring that a higher proportion of those little turtles kind of reach the sea. And why I love Costa Rica is they've got a phrase called pura vida, which is translated to kind of pure life, and that really kind of encapsulates the whole culture in Costa Rica, and it's around kind of cherishing life and taking kind of that pleasure in those really small things and taking kind of joy in the small things in life, and linking that to well-being. I think it's something that we can all take a huge amount from.
Definitely. It's such a lovely connection, isn't it? And what an incredible thing to get involved in. I really love that. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, definitely.
I've been to Costa Rica.
Humbling experience.
Yeah.
Not been.
No, not been there. So that's definitely...
you need to add it onto your list. Definitely.
Perfect. So let's start. I think you're right. I think there has been a lot more awareness around well-being and what that means for us in general and also in the workplace. But why don't we just start by unpacking that first? What does well-being mean to you?
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and one that I debate with so many people. And when I'm running sessions, kind of, it's always one of the first questions that I start with. And it's so personal to each and every one of us. And I don't think I've ever heard the same answer kind of from people when I ask them what it means. But I really like the kind of Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is just kind of being comfortable, healthy and happy, which is a very simplistic way of defining well-being. And of course, it's a little more kind of nuanced and complex than that. But it's about kind of understanding what allows us to be at our best and recognizing those things that have kind of a positive and a negative impact on our lives. And, I always say to people, it's very much a journey. There's no end point. It's something we constantly need to be working on, and we need to integrate it into our life kind of in a way that's right for us, and kind of constantly review it, because there's different times in our life where we need very, very different things. So just because our well-being is good now, and the things that we're doing is working now for us, doesn't necessarily mean that in kind of 6 months they're still the right things. So yeah, it's this kind of constant journey of reviewing, really, to allow us to be at our best, which is something that I say all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that continual focus on it, I think it comes through as something that's really important. Why, whether you see this in kind of your own practice or through the research, what are we seeing as the main benefits of that positive well-being for people?
Yeah, so on an individual level, it positively impacts so much. So kind of our health and our stress levels, primarily, actually for us to have good physical health and low levels of stress, well-being is fundamental to that. When we've got good levels of well-being, we tend to be kind of more positive. Our levels of happiness are higher. Our satisfaction with life more generally tend to be kind of a lot higher, which then has that knock-on impact, doesn't it, to our emotions, the relationships that we've got, our social connections. It's kind of, it keeps going and it keeps going. And I suppose linking it to a work perspective, when we've got good levels of well-being, we're generally more productive. We've got high levels of performance. And we're more resilient, really. So actually, when we are in a good place, then we're more able to deal with those kind of challenges and setbacks than we are when our well-being might be suffering.
Absolutely. I think we know, don't we, when we take those moments to reflect and we know we're not in our best place, we know it comes through to how we're showing up, or our performance, or our relationships, whether it's in work or outside of work. When we're not in a good place, that absolutely will see its effects. We might be able to hide it for a while, but actually longer term or for a period of time, it's just not sustainable to kind of hide away from what's going on there. So what are you seeing as the impacts of that then for leaders? Why is it important for leaders to have a good focus on their own well-being?
Yeah, and leaders are in such a difficult position, aren't they? They're under lots and lots of stress, there's lots of pressure. And, that leads to kind of longer working hours and kind of high levels of stress. And that is going to take its toll on our well-being. And, I don't necessarily think that we recognize enough at the time when we're really overworked, when we are stressed, when we're suffering from that burnout. But that does have that knock-on impact on productivity levels, performance, creativity, our ability to make good decisions, all those things. And actually, I think if we recognize that at the time, it could really kind of lead to much less levels of burnout. And I think it's that checking in with ourselves regularly. How are we feeling? What's worrying us? How are we looking after ourselves physically? And a big thing is, those energy drainers. We all know those things that drain our energy kind of day in, day out. So what are we doing to counterbalance that? And, I know we talked about the word balance and how much we love that and how important balance is. But, when we are being drained on a constant basis because of the pressures we're under as leaders, we need to think about kind of how we're recharging ourselves and kind of listening to what our body needs. And adjusting things accordingly. There's times when we can deal with more when we're under that constant pressure, but almost that ends in sight, and then we can rest a little bit. But it's about that kind of regular check-in and reflection, and just recognizing what we need at that point in time.
Yeah, I'm hearing that loud and clear there around that kind of self-reflection, that taking that time out to really understand where you are. And that's almost the most important thing, really, isn't it? Is actually being proactive and being deliberate about understanding where your well-being is, and therefore what are the knock-on effects of that. You touched on a couple of kind of questions that people might be able to kind of consider for that self-reflection piece there. What would be kind of like, if you got a go-to exercise that you like that other leaders maybe could try for practice for themselves in terms of that checking in?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of questions that kind of I'd really like to ask. So, just how am I feeling? Because it's not really a question we tend to ask ourselves, is it? And then, how kind of are we looking after our body? Are we doing all those things that we know make a difference? So are we eating well? Are we exercising? Are we getting enough sleep? Kind of, are we hydrating? How are we spending our time? If that balance is completely out, if we're working 13, 14 hours a day, even just that recognition can help us think, right, we need to get that a little bit more in balance, and we need to take that time to for ourselves. And the last thing that I always use is kind of what's sparking joy in our life at the moment. So what are those small little things and those small little habits that we can just put in place that, just give us a little bit of a boost, and they're tiny things that we can do kind of every day that just, as I say, give our well-being a little bit of a boost and can just really help with how we're feeling.
I love that feeling, that sparking joy, that little bit of moment. And it could be absolutely anything, couldn't it? Like a sniff of a favorite perfume, like anything, couldn't it? It could be finding an image that brings you joy, or a photo snap from a happy moment, and it's just that opportunity to connect with something that just makes you feel good, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And for me, there's two things that I always do when I'm working from home. I have a candle on next to me because it just always smells lovely, and it just makes me feel great. And when I'm cold, I have a hot water bottle, and they just spark so much joy into my day. Yeah, and it's not feeling guilty either for prioritising our well-being. I think kind of when we're busy and we've got so much going on, we just go to the bottom of the pile, don't we? But, actually, can we put ourselves up that list just a little bit? Coming back to that, for us to be at our best for other people and for our jobs, we need to feel good ourselves. So actually putting ourselves higher up that list is only going to benefit everything and everyone, really.
Absolutely. And it's so valuable to do that, isn't it? And I think it's really interesting, because this next part I'd like us to have a think about is, as leaders, the role we then play in role modeling that positivity and that well-being approach with our team. If we've not got in a place actually where we are living positive well-being, how do we then step into that space of encouraging it in other people? And I know I've worked in teams before where it's like, yeah, you really must take your lunch break. And then you see the leaders around you never taking their lunch break, or working really, really long hours and not getting any balance and not seeing any balance. And like you said, we talked about balance quite a bit in that session you did in the leadership development program, because that's important, isn't it? Like, we've got to have the balance first, and then we need to step into that role modeling. So what does good look like for you in that space of leaders role modeling?
Yeah, and you're right that leading by example and kind of role modeling those healthy habits and behaviors is kind of really, really important. And you touched on a couple of them there. So kind of this promoting a positive work-life balance. And that means, taking a lunch break, taking breaks throughout the day, taking your annual leave. That's a big one. The amount of leaders I work with, and they go, oh, I've got 3 weeks left of my annual leave. And you think, no wonder you're kind of exhausted. It's there for a reason, and you need to take it. And actually, if you're doing those things and, being really vocal and obvious about it, it's going to make your teams feel like they can do the same, and actually they should be doing those things. So that's really important. Boundaries, something, again, I talk a lot about, what is it that you need to put in place to protect your well-being, and having those open conversations with your team around, what boundaries do they need to put in place to protect their well-being. And I think boundaries are blurred a little bit probably with kind of flexibility and hybrid working, which is great, and if it works for people, but it can be detrimental. And if we're working from home, we can't find that bleeding into our kind of evening. So those boundaries, I think, are really, really important. And for me, having conversations about well-being. So if you as a leader can be quite open and vulnerable about what it is that you do to protect your well-being, maybe at times when you might have struggled, and how it was that you overcame this. Maybe you reached out for some support, had counselling, therapy. When you hear leaders being really, really vulnerable, I think it can be really, really powerful. So yeah, and also sort of getting involved in workplace initiatives. So again, that kind of leading by example bit. And, if you've always got your senior team at programs that you're doing or events, then that just gives other people that permission to, to really protect and look after their well-being and get involved in everything that organisations are putting on.
So I think that permission piece is so important. Like, we shouldn't be having to wait for permission, should we? And actually,
Absolutely
even when
not.
The permission is apparently being granted, the behaviour that or the culture doesn't really back up that side of things. So that's really important that the permission is genuine and that it's actually actively encouraged, and the role modelling is happening around that. Because otherwise we can say, yeah, you're saying that, but actually, if I want to get on here, am I going to have to do the long hours, the this and that, because that's what you're doing? So that's where that permission base needs to really be genuine and kind of heartfelt, and part of what's going on in the culture, because that will undo the words that you're saying as a leader if actually you're not doing what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it interesting when organisations maybe put in place, we're going to have a sort of well-being hour, which everyone focuses on the well-being. And, that has a great intention. But actually, why is it that we're having to give people sort of an hour to protect their well-being? Actually, that should be something that's kind of in place all the time. And actually, they should be kind of trying to really build this culture of well-being, and not just for an hour a week. And then for the other 36 and a half hours, people are as stressed as hell.
Oh, absolutely. So where we focused on there for leaders is really about that self-check-in, that understanding where they are and understanding the things that they might need to shift or put in place around how they're looking after their well-being. In terms of with the individual, with their teams, it's starting to look into that space of active, open conversations around well-being, where they can and feel comfortable to be a bit more vulnerable and share their own experiences. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the same experience for somebody else, but the fact that you've been open and honest about your own experience means that they're more likely to uncover and share what might be happening with them, or share with a colleague, so that it kind of builds that connection around well-being. And that needs to role model, and for that permission to be there, but for it to be really true permission, feels like really important themes. Is there anything else you think leaders should be thinking about in terms of really enabling that positive well-being culture and attitude across their team?
Yeah, so one thing I talk to people about is just starting kind of one-to-one meetings or team meetings just with a bit of a check-in. So instead of going straight into where are we with this, that and the other, and what KPIs have we hit and what have we not, like actually just spend a bit of time seeing how people are, understand kind of people's feelings, what's going on for them at the moment, what support they might need. It comes back to those great conversations, which, are just such an advocate of kind of talking and communication, because it can solve so many issues. So I think that check-in bit, and I was horrified during the pandemic. I read a stat that over 50% of people hadn't been asked by their boss how they were. And I just thought, oh my goodness me. You kind of take that for granted, that you kind of ask people how they are. But I guess when you're stressed and under pressure and you've got kind of loads of things going on, you just dive straight in. But actually, if we can take a bit of a step back and, really just understand kind of how people are, I think that can be really beneficial. And then, setting realistic expectations. So, the biggest causes of stress and poor well-being in the workplace is, too high workloads, too much pressure. So actually, your role as a leader is, setting those realistic deadlines in terms of that kind of workload, those expectations, and regularly reviewing those and kind of having those discussions. So team members feel like, they can really share when they're struggling. And again, coming back to those kind of conversations and not just feeling like they then have to work, loads of extra hours to kind of get the work done. And I think leaders also have a real role in terms of social connections, and social well-being is so important for us, and having that sense of belonging and positive relationships and positive interactions. And I think that's something that leaders can do to really kind of foster that within teams and get that really good team feel. And we all know when we've got kind of great people around us and kind of those work friends and supportive leaders and managers around us, it makes all the difference to our well-being.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I know I've seen several examples rather of leaders who have brought the focus on that connection across the team as well. And that can have a well-being focus, but sometimes it doesn't at all. And actually the impact of it is positive well-being. So it doesn't have to all be centered around wellness when you're thinking about well-being. It's absolutely about the full picture. And actually, what's the impact of what you're doing on well-being, and looking at it from that way around, which I think is a really lovely way of kind of the things that you've touched on there in terms of how leaders can approach that. And just that opportunity to say hello. Like, I couldn't believe that stat during COVID. That's just ridiculous.
I was horrified. And I still talk about it now. And, that's a 4-year-old stat now. But wow. I was absolutely horrified at that. So, yeah.
But we also know the examples where we've been in offices and we've got the big boss that's walked past and never said hello, or just those tiny little pieces where opportunities that people have to connect and to engage with people. And that's especially important when we're living in this hybrid, remote, maybe office, maybe not all in the same office, maybe, very different way of working. Actually being deliberate about those connections is critical to that team dynamic, but also to the wellness of your team and the positive well-being of your team. So if that's an area that you're not comfortable with at the moment, kind of have a look for resources to look at how you can do that more. I've got some resources to share on that, so I'll make sure that they're available in the notes for the podcast. If you're wanting a little bit of ideas or inspiration to kind of think about how you connect and build connection across your teams. So we'll make sure you've got those resources. In terms of the benefits, I guess, what are you seeing in the research or in your work of this shift and making sure that well-being, positive well-being and the fulfillment of the team actually is a high priority? So what are the benefits for leaders to pay attention into this space?
Yeah, and this is something I'm really interested in terms of for individuals that maybe are struggling to get that buy-in from their senior leadership team to really kind of invest in the well-being of their teams. What are some of those key pieces of research that might help? And there was a study by Gallup that found companies with engaged employees outperform their peers by 147%, which is like an absolutely huge stat. And then there's a study by the Harvard Business Review that found that companies with highly engaged employees had a 19% increase in income and a 28% increase in earnings growth compared to their peers. So, as much as to you and I, it is just the right thing to do and how you should run your business. Actually, there is a real kind of return on investment for doing this as well, that should really kind of speak to those financial directors and kind of CEOs that maybe don't always see the people benefits. But you'll have more motivation, more engagement from team members, which in turn leads to, high productivity, high performance, lower levels of stress, lower absentee levels, coming back to this kind of collaboration, more trust, higher morale. There's so kind of many benefits to it. If you kind of type it into Google, like, why should you look after your employees? There's just reams and reams and reams of research about kind of why it's so important. And particularly at the moment, I think when organizations are struggling somewhat with kind of retaining their employees, again, it's just a really important way to build that loyalty within your teams. And again, another stat, so there was some research by Mind, and this was specifically talking about mental health, but those staff that feel like their mental health and well-being is supported at work are 84% less likely to leave to join another organization. So again, so much research just to show that it can be so beneficial to your organization and really help you kind of stand out, I suppose, in a particularly if you're in a sector that's really fighting for kind of that top talent. It can be that real differentiator for you.
And leaders have a huge impact on that side of things within the workplace. So again, there's research about the impact that leaders have on, you're more like going to have more impact on your well-being than your doctor does. So that's something I've seen recently, and it's the reality is there's huge benefits for the business to pay attention here. But actually, just you as a single leader, no matter what's happening in the organization or the culture of the organization, your responsibility, the impact that you have is really great. It's very impactful, the impact that you have. And therefore finding that opportunity to be in the right space and to support people in the right way isn't just about the benefits for your team, but it's also about the benefits for you in terms of your reputation as a leader. What's that going to mean for your development in terms of positive progression and development as a leader and your reputation in that space? It's really important. And also, I know from some of my own experiences where I've had positive examples of leadership and well-being, that's had a positive impact on me as an individual. And it's also encouraged my own development into that leadership space as well. And I think that role modelling isn't just about the wellness of the individual, but it's about the development of your talent and your team as well. So huge benefits. And I'd say it's just much more enjoyable to lead that way. And much more enjoyable to lead that way. But then actually, when you can start having positive conversations with people about where they are and understanding your people, building your relationships, like the relationships you build with your team, it's so vital. And it's absolutely to be able to do that. And actually then to know you're having a positive impact on their day, their week, their month, their year. I don't think there's much nicer than that, really.
I agree 100%.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing those insights in terms of leadership and well-being as a leader. I really, really appreciate you joining us, Gemma. Where can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn under Gemma Carter-Morris or our website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders. And we'll see you next time. A big thank you from me to Gemma from Next Steps Consulting, and joining us for that really interesting episode on well-being as a leader. And also we kind of delved into some things you can be thinking about the well-being of your own team as well. So hopefully it's given you a really good balance and a focus for yourself, but also it's started you thinking about how your leadership and the impact of your leadership bleeds into your team and what works for your team. And finally, thank you for joining this episode of the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. You'll find all the resources and the links that we mentioned down in the show notes. If you love this episode, why not share it with somebody else in a leadership role who you think would find this useful? If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if we've earned it, why not leave us a 5-star review? I'm Anwen, your host, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast very soon. Bye for now.